Hold on a second. Let's run an experiment. Right now. This very moment. Imagine a lemon. Yellow. Juicy. Cut it open. Put a slice on your tongue. Did your mouth start watering? Nothing physically happened. There was no actual lemon. But your body reacted as if it was real. Neville Goddard says this is the proof. Your imagination is real. Far more real than you think it is. And once you learn to use it the right way, your life changes permanently. Welcome to Story Reads, and today we're breaking down Neville Goddard's book The Creative Use of Imagination. Let's get into it. This book is a collection of Neville's lectures. And in this book, Neville explains imagination from an angle that maybe no one else has quite captured the way he does. Most people think of imagination as a tool. Something you use occasionally. When you're planning something. When you're writing a story. Or when kids are playing pretend. But Neville says imagination is not a tool. Imagination is what you are. And this entire book explores that one truth, with complete depth, complete detail. So let's begin with the foundation this whole book stands on. Neville starts with a very important distinction. He says there are two uses of imagination. The first use is imitative imagination. The second use is creative imagination. These two are very different. And which one you're using is, in a very real sense, deciding your entire life. So let's understand each of them one at a time. What is imitative imagination? Imitative means copying. Repeating something that already exists. When you use imitative imagination, you're imagining something that has already happened. Something that's already real. Like, someone wronged you, and you keep replaying that event in your mind, over and over. That conversation. That moment. That feeling. You're imitating. Copying. What happened? Or, you're going through financial tightness, and every day you keep replaying that same tightness, those same bills, that same anxiety, in your mind. This is imitative imagination. And Neville says it's not just useless. It's actually harmful. Why? Because when you repeatedly imagine something, whether it's a past event or a current problem, you're strengthening it. Making it more real. And whatever is more real in imagination becomes more real in life. This is why imitative imagination keeps you spinning in the same circle. Repeating what was. What is. Now what is creative imagination? Creative means making something new. When you use creative imagination, you imagine something that doesn't currently exist. Something that isn't your present reality. But something you want it to be. Like, you're in financial tightness, but instead of replaying that tightness, you imagine a scene in which you're financially secure. Where you're paying your bills with ease. Where you have more than enough. And you imagine that scene so vividly, so genuinely, that it starts to feel real. This is creative imagination. And Neville says this is the imagination that actually changes your life. But here a very important question comes up. Does this actually change your life? Just from imagining? Neville's answer is yes. But with one condition. And that condition is feeling. And this is exactly where the lemon experiment becomes relevant. When you imagined the lemon and your mouth watered, why did that happen? Because you didn't just see the lemon. You felt it. You felt its sourness on your tongue. Even though it wasn't actually there. And your body reacted to that feeling. As if it was a real feeling. Neville says this exact principle applies to your entire life. When you genuinely feel that something is real, even if it's not physically present right now, your consciousness accepts it as real. And what consciousness accepts as real, manifests. This is the core of the creative use of imagination. Now let's go deeper into this. Neville makes a very important statement in this book. Imagining creates reality. This statement is very bold. And a lot of people disagree the first time they hear it. How can this be? If I imagine that I have a lot of money, will money just automatically appear? That sounds unrealistic. But Neville says, wait. First understand what imagining actually means. He says imagining doesn't just mean creating a mental picture. Imagining means living in a state of consciousness. And it's this state of consciousness that determines what happens in your life. Let's understand this with a very simple example. Say there are two people, both going for an interview at the same company. The first person genuinely feels, inside, I deserve this job. I'm going to get it. I'll do great at it. This is his state of consciousness. The second person genuinely feels, inside, I don't know if I'll get it. There will probably be better candidates than me. Maybe they'll reject me. This is his state of consciousness. Now outwardly. Both did the same preparation. Same resume. Same qualifications. Both going into the same interview. But what happens in the interview? The first person. His body language will have confidence. His answers will have clarity. His voice will have certainty. The interviewer will sense that. And will naturally be drawn toward him. The second person. His body language will have hesitation. His answers will have doubt. His voice will have uncertainty. The interviewer will sense that too. And will naturally be less convinced. No magic happened. No big miracle occurred. Just whatever inner state was there, whatever was in the imagination, got expressed outwardly. The first person's, I am worthy, imagination presented him in a specific way. And that presentation shaped the outcome. Neville says this is what, imagining creates reality, means. It's not cosmic magic. It's a psychological and practical truth, operating in every moment, in every situation, with every person. The only question is, in which direction are you imagining? Now another very important concept that comes up early in this book. Neville says all of us, every moment, are imagining. This never stops. When you're awake, you're imagining. When you're asleep, you're dreaming. You're imagining. When you're talking to someone, you're imagining what they're thinking. When you're making a decision, you're imagining what will happen next. Imagination isn't like a tap that can be turned on and off. Imagination is always flowing. And Neville says this is our biggest problem. Because since imagination is always flowing, most of us aren't controlling this flow. It flows in the direction of our fears, our worries, our painful past memories. And this uncontrolled, negative imagination is exactly what creates those same problems, those same situations, those same experiences, again and again in our lives. This is why this book is called The Creative Use of Imagination. Creative use. Meaning, deliberately, consciously, letting imagination flow in the direction that you actually want. Now another important concept that Neville explains in great detail in this book. He says your imagination and your physical brain are not separate. Rather, whatever happens in imagination, happens in the brain. And whatever happens in the brain, happens in the body. And whatever happens in the body, happens in actions. And whatever happens in actions, happens in the outer world. There's a complete chain. Imagination, then brain, then body, then actions, then outer world. And this chain begins with imagination. This is why, if you want to change the outer world, the most effective place to start is imagination. But Neville pauses here. And gives a very important clarification. He says imagination is only half the story. The other half of the story is feeling. And it's the combination of both that creates real creative power. Imagination without feeling is an empty picture. Feeling without imagination is energy without direction. But imagination with feeling. This is the combination that creates reality. Let's understand this with an example. Say there's a guy named Mike. Mike wants to become a singer. First scenario. Mike imagines. I'm on stage. There's a big audience. I'm singing. He creates this picture. But there's no feeling in it. He's mechanically constructing this image. Second scenario. Mike imagines, and this time he genuinely enters that scene. He feels the stage lights. He feels the energy of the audience. When he starts singing and the crowd goes wild, he feels that joy. That thrill. That rush of thousands of people singing along with him. Which imagination is more powerful? Obviously, the second one. Because the second one has feeling. And feeling is the language that the subconscious mind understands. Neville gives a very interesting analogy in this book. He says imagination is the seed. Feeling is the water. Without water, a seed will never grow. You can plant the seed. But if it doesn't get water, it'll just stay in the ground. Similarly, you can build the picture in your imagination. But if it doesn't have genuine feeling, it won't materialize. This is why, whenever you practice creative imagination, always ask yourself, am I genuinely feeling this? Or am I just building a hollow picture? Now a concept that's a very central part of the creative use of imagination. Neville talks about moods. We all know what mood is. Sometimes we're in a good mood, sometimes a bad one. Sometimes energetic, sometimes down. Sometimes hopeful, sometimes hopeless. But Neville presents moods in this book from a very different angle. He says mood isn't just a passing feeling. Mood is a creative state. And whatever mood you're in directly shapes what manifests in your life. Let's understand this properly. Neville says every desired outcome has a specific mood. A specific emotional texture. Like, what's the mood of a successful businessman? A settled confidence. An easy authority. A sense that things naturally come to him. Or, what's the mood of someone who feels deeply loved? A warmth. A sense of belonging. A feeling that they're cared for and valued. Neville says if you want that desired outcome, first genuinely feel that mood. And don't say, when I get this, then I'll have this mood. Instead say, I'm choosing this mood right now. This is a very important distinction. Most people think outer circumstances create mood. You get a good job, so you feel confident. You have a good relationship, so you feel loved. You have money, so you feel secure. But Neville says it's the opposite. Mood comes first. Then outer circumstances reflect that mood. Feel confident. And situations start forming that justify that confidence. Feel loved. And the people and situations that bring more love start showing up. Feel secure. And the circumstances that bring more security start developing. Mood is the cause. Circumstances are the effect. This is why people who consistently live in bad moods consistently have bad circumstances. And people who consistently live in good moods consistently have good circumstances. This isn't luck. This is a law. Now Neville answers a very practical question. But my circumstances are exactly what's making me feel bad. What do I do? This is a genuine question. And a lot of people get stuck right here. Neville's answer is, you have to deliberately, consciously, learn to choose your mood. Despite the outer circumstances. And how does this happen? Through imagination. When you deliberately imagine a specific desired state, genuinely enter it, genuinely experience its feeling, your mood shifts. For a while. At first. But if you do this consistently, every day, that mood starts becoming your default mood. And the moment it becomes your default mood, the outer world starts reflecting it. This is a practice. It doesn't happen overnight. But it happens. And the creative use of imagination explains this exact practice in great detail. Now a concept that's very prominent in this book. Neville says whenever you imagine a desired state, use a specific technique. That technique is thinking from the end. What does this mean? Most people, when setting a goal, think from here to there. I'm here. I need to get there. What's the path? Neville says this approach always keeps you in a sense of distance. I'm not there yet. I need to get there. And the subconscious mind catches that distance. Instead, first, mentally, imaginatively, arrive at that endpoint. And live from there. As if you're already there. This is thinking from the end. A very relatable example. Say there's a young woman named Laura. Laura wants to become a doctor. Thinking toward the end would be, I have so much to study. I need to clear my entrance exam. Then medical school. Then internship. It's such a long road. Thinking this way, she's seeing the distance from here to there. And this distance often feels overwhelming. Thinking from the end would be, Laura imagines she's already a doctor. She has a clinic. A patient walks in. She examines them. Diagnoses them. Suggests treatment. The patient leaves grateful. Laura genuinely stays in that scene. Thinks from the perspective of Dr. Laura. And when she comes out of that imagination, her energy is different. Her attitude is different. She studies like a doctor who's already in the process of becoming, not like a student trying to eventually become a doctor. This subtle difference makes a huge difference. Neville says when you genuinely think from the end, the subconscious mind takes that end as the current reality. And starts working to produce it. Now a very important and interesting section. Neville shares a very specific observation in this book. He says when big inventors, scientists, artists, writers are asked where their ideas come from, they often say, I don't know. It just came suddenly. An idea came to me in a dream one night. I was doing something else when the idea suddenly hit me. Neville says this isn't a coincidence. This happens because they consistently directed their imagination toward a specific problem or desire. And when imagination is focused this way, answers and ideas come on their own. They don't have to force them. And often those answers come in a moment when the conscious mind is relaxed. Like right before sleep. Or right after waking up. Or in the shower. Because in those moments, the conscious mind's guard is loosened. And the subconscious mind, which has been working the whole time, brings its answer up to the surface. Neville says this is the principle of discovery. And every person can use this same principle. For any desire. You just need to consistently hold your imagination in that desired direction. And then trust that answers, ideas, opportunities will automatically come. Now a very important technique that Neville very specifically explains in this book. He says to make imagination effective, choose a specific scene. Just one. This is very important. Because a lot of people imagine very broadly. I am successful. I have everything. My life is good. This is very vague. The subconscious gets no specific direction. Neville says choose one specific scene. A scene that represents your desire as already fulfilled. And the scene should be one that would normally only happen if the desire has been fulfilled. An example. Say someone wants a good job. Broad imagination. I'm in a good job. I'm happy. Specific scene. An old friend calls me. And says, hey, I heard you got an amazing job. Congratulations. And I'm genuinely happy, telling him the details. This scene is specific. This scene would only happen once the job is actually secured. So the subconscious gets a clear signal. And when you genuinely feel this specific scene, like the friend's voice, his congratulations, the joy you're feeling, it goes deep into the subconscious. Neville says this one specific scene. Experience it genuinely every night before sleep. Repeatedly. And watch what happens. Now a concept that's a very central teaching in this book. Neville talks about the state akin to sleep. We all know there's a stage right before sleep when we drift slowly into it. Eyes get heavy. Thoughts slow down. Connection with the world gets a bit loose. That's the state. Neville says this state is very special. Maybe the most precious state of the entire day. Why? Because in this state, the conscious mind relaxes. The conscious mind is the one that's logical, rational, skeptical. The one that says, this isn't possible. How would this happen? This isn't realistic. When you're awake and fully conscious, the conscious mind questions every positive imagination, challenges it, and often rejects it. But when you're in that drowsy, half-asleep state, the conscious mind's guard loosens. And in that moment, whatever imagination, whatever feeling you experience, goes directly, without filter, into the subconscious. And the subconscious is what actually creates. What actually manifests. Neville says this is why. Right before sleep. When you're in that drowsy state. Imagine that specific scene. And genuinely experience the feeling of that scene. And with that feeling, fall asleep. This is a very simple but very powerful practice. Now a very real question. Do I have to do this only at night? Or during the day too? Neville says ideally both. At night, SAT's, state akin to sleep, is most powerful. Because in that state, the subconscious is most directly accessible. But during the day too. Whenever you get a quiet moment. Whenever there's a natural pause. Briefly bring your imagination to that desired scene. Just for a moment. Touch that feeling. And this daily practice, combined with the deeper practice at night, becomes a very powerful continuous practice. Now a concept that's specifically explored in the creative use of imagination. Neville talks about reason versus imagination. Neville says most people consider reason the highest faculty. Logic. Analysis. Evidence-based thinking. And they consider imagination a childish, impractical thing. But Neville says this thinking is wrong. And this thinking is exactly what keeps most people far from their biggest dreams. He explains. Reason is always based on present evidence. On what already is. If your life currently has tightness, reason will say. Look. The evidence is that there's no money. This is reality. And reason will always say this. Because reason looks at the past and present. Not the future. But imagination. Imagination sees what could be. What will be. What should be. Imagination can look forward. And when it genuinely looks forward with feeling, it creates that future too. Neville says reason tells you what is. Imagination shows you what could be. And if you only depend on reason, you'll always remain what you currently are. But if you use imagination, genuinely, powerfully, you can become what you want to become. This doesn't mean completely ignoring reason. Reason has its own place. In practical planning. In day-to-day decisions. But don't put reason in the driver's seat. Put imagination in the driver's seat. And reason in the seat of a wise advisor. Now a very practically important concept. Neville talks in this book about planting the seed. This is a very beautiful metaphor. And Neville explains it very specifically. He says when a farmer plants a seed, he does some specific things. First, he chooses the right seed. He clearly knows what he wants to grow. Second, he plants that seed in the right soil. At the right depth. Third, he waters it. He takes care of it. Fourth, He trusts. He knows the process will happen. The seed will germinate. The plant will grow. Even though nothing shows from outside right now. And fifth, he doesn't dig up the seed every day to check if it's grown. He maintains patience. Neville says creative imagination works exactly the same way. First, choose the right desire. What you genuinely want. Second, plant that desire in the right soil. That soil is the subconscious mind. And the right depth is genuine feeling. Third, take care of it. Meaning, consistently experience the feeling of that desired scene. Fourth, trust. The process is happening. Even though nothing shows outside right now. Fifth, don't dig up the seed every day. Meaning, don't keep asking, what happened? Why hasn't it happened yet? Why hasn't it manifested? This disturbs the process. Neville says there's another commonality between farming and imagination. The farmer doesn't force the harvest. He simply creates good conditions. And nature does its work. Similarly, you don't need to force the outcome. Just create good inner conditions. Genuine imagination. Genuine feeling. Genuine trust. And consciousness will do its work. Now a very interesting and practically useful concept. Neville talks in this book about the bridge of incidents. This concept is very fascinating. Neville says when you genuinely assume a desired state, genuinely start living in that end, something interesting starts happening. A series of events starts coming into your life. One after another. Like a chain. One event happens. It opens a door. Through that door, another event happens. Which shows another path. And gradually, these events build a bridge. A bridge between where you were and where you wanted to go. Neville says what this bridge will look like isn't known beforehand. And it doesn't need to be. Your job is to genuinely assume the end state. And the subconscious, with its own creativity, constructs that bridge of incidents. A real example that makes this concept clear. Say there's a guy named James. James wants to become an author. He hasn't written a book yet. James genuinely assumes he's a published author. Every night before sleep, he imagines a scene where someone is congratulating him about his book. Now what happens? One day, an old friend runs into him. Asks, "Do you write anything? Your writing style was always good." This is one event. James says yes. And shares an old essay of his. That friend has a connection at an online magazine. The magazine wants to publish James's essay. This is the second event. The article being published in the magazine catches the eye of a publisher. Third event. The publisher asks for a book proposal. Fourth event. A book deal happens. This was the bridge of incidents. James didn't know beforehand that the path would be this. But when he genuinely assumed the end state, consciousness constructed this bridge. Neville says every manifestation happens this way. You don't know the path. You just need to know the destination. And genuinely be there, in inner consciousness. Now a very important and often overlooked concept. Neville talks about the pruning shears of revision. This concept is very powerful. And in the creative use of imagination, Neville discusses it in great detail. What is revision? Revision means experiencing, in your imagination, what has already happened, but differently. A past event. As if it actually happened in a better way. This might sound a bit confusing to understand, so let's clarify it with an example. Say today at the office, your boss scolded you very unfairly. In front of everyone. You felt very bad about it. Now you go home. And at night, that moment keeps replaying in your mind. Why did the boss say that? How embarrassed I was. I wish I had said this. I wish he hadn't done that. This is imitative imagination. Replaying the past. And what does this do? That negative emotion deepens, settles further into the subconscious, and creates more situations like this in the future. Now revision. Before sleep at night. In a relaxed state. Imagine that same moment. But this time. Differently. The boss calls you. Listens to you carefully. And says, "You did a great job. Keep it up." Genuinely feel that moment. That pride. That satisfaction. This is revision. Neville says this does two things. First, the emotional charge of that negative past event dissolves. You don't carry that negativity forward. Second, a new positive pattern gets planted in the subconscious. Future interactions with that boss or other bosses will happen differently. Neville says something very interesting. He says the past isn't dead. The events that have happened cannot physically change. This is true. But the emotional meaning of those events, their impact, that can change. And that change happens through imagination and revision. Neville calls this pruning shears, because just as a gardener cuts old, dead branches to make room for new growth, revision prunes past negative experiences. Cuts their harmful impact. So that new, positive experiences can grow in the future. This is a very powerful practice. And Neville suggests doing it daily. Every night. The events of the day that disturbed you, revise them. Experience them the way you wanted them to go. And you'll watch, gradually, how the overall quality of your life starts improving. Now a concept that's beautifully presented in this book. Neville talks about the central character. He gives a very interesting analogy. He says your life is a story. And in that story, you're the central character. But here's a very important question. In this story, what kind of character are you? Most people are a passive character. Things happen to them. They respond to circumstances. They accept events. But Neville says you can become an active character. One who shapes the story. Who creates events. And this shift, from passive to active, happens through imagination. When you deliberately, consciously use creative imagination, when you genuinely live in the desired end state, that's when you become the active character of your own story. Neville shares a very interesting example. He says think about two actors. The first actor. He comes on stage. And mechanically reads the script he's been given. No feeling. No connection. Just words. The second actor. He comes on stage. And he genuinely becomes that character. Feels their feelings. Thinks from their perspective. Reacts the way they would. Which actor is more convincing? Obviously the second one. Neville says this applies to life as well. People who genuinely, deeply, live that desired character, who experience that character's feelings, manifest that character into reality too. And people who just do surface-level, positive thinking, without genuine feeling, are like that first actor. Mechanical. And ineffective. Feeling is the key. Always. Now a very important topic. Neville talks in this book about hearing and seeing in imagination. This is very practically useful. Neville says when you imagine a desired scene, don't just build a static picture. Live the scene. This means, hear the sounds there. The people who are with you in that scene, their voices. Hear them talking to you. Feel the texture there. The texture of a chair. The temperature of the air. The sensation in your hands. Imagine the smells there. This multisensory imagination is far more powerful. Because it doesn't let the subconscious feel that this is just imagination. The more sensory details, the more real it'll feel. And the more real it feels, the more effectively the subconscious will accept it. Remember the lemon experiment. What was that too? Multisensory imagination. You saw color. Felt texture. Got a taste experience. And what was the result? Your mouth watered. Use this same principle in your desired scenes. Neville gives a specific technique. He says when you're in SATS, before sleep, imagine a specific desired conversation. Someone is congratulating you. Or someone is giving you the news you want to hear. And genuinely hear their voice. Their words. Congratulations. You did such a great job. You got the job. The deal happened. Whatever words you want to hear. Genuinely hear them. In your imagination. Neville says this, hearing in imagination, is very powerful. Because language, words, very specifically program the subconscious. Now a very important and deep concept. Neville talks in this book about gratitude and imagination. Neville says gratitude is a very powerful creative state. And not because gratitude is spiritually correct. It's because genuine gratitude carries a specific feeling. The feeling of, I have received. When you're genuinely grateful for something, your inner state is, I have received. I have it. It's mine. And this exact feeling, already received, is what signals the subconscious to create. This is why Neville suggests. Whenever you imagine a desired state, add an element of gratitude to it. Like. In your scene of getting the desired job. Genuinely feel grateful in your imagination. I'm so happy this happened. Thank God. This gratitude feeling gives that imagination a lot of power. And another practical use. Neville says right now. In this moment. Whatever is good in your life, be genuinely grateful for it. This small practice, done daily, raises your baseline mood. And when the baseline mood is higher, imagination works far more effectively. Because in a negative, low mood, imagination can't focus well. But when you're genuinely grateful, your inner state is receptive, open, and positive. And in that state, desired imagination goes very effectively into the subconscious. Now a concept that comes up very specifically and practically in this book. Neville talks about the importance of a single act. Neville says in imagination practice, you don't have to imagine everything. Just one. Single. Specific. Act. An act that represents your desire as already fulfilled. Let's understand this with an example. Say someone's dream is to live in a big, beautiful house. He tries to imagine the entire house. Every room. Every detail. This becomes very overwhelming. Neville says instead. Choose one single act. Like. Standing on that house's balcony in the morning, drinking coffee. And looking at a beautiful view. Just this one act. Genuinely feel it. The warmth of the coffee in your hands. The touch of the balcony railing. The vastness of the view. This single act represents that you're living in that desired house. And this one act, because of its specificity, goes much more powerfully into the subconscious. Neville says don't overwhelm the subconscious. One clear, specific, emotionally rich act. This is the most effective. Now a very important concept that appears in this book. Neville talks about natural symbolism. This concept is a little unique. But very practically useful. Neville says when you choose a scene or act to represent a desired state, that scene should be naturally symbolic. Meaning. That scene should be the kind that would naturally, logically only happen if the desire has been fulfilled. Like. If you want a good job, a natural scene would be someone congratulating you. Or you sitting in your new office. These scenes naturally happen only when the job is actually secured. But if you imagine some forced, artificial, out-of-context scene, it's not as effective. Because the subconscious needs to understand the context. Neville says use natural symbols. Acts that are naturally associated with that desired state. And the subconscious processes those natural associations very easily and effectively. Now a concept that's beautifully present in the creative use of imagination. Neville talks about the art of convincing yourself. This is very important. And this is often where people fail. Neville says the biggest challenge in imagination practice is not the technique. The biggest challenge is genuinely convincing yourself that the desire is already fulfilled. Because the conscious mind resists. This isn't true. This is just imagination. This isn't reality. And as long as the conscious mind resists, the imagination doesn't go deep enough. Neville says the way to overcome this resistance is repetition. Again and again. Consistently. Every night. The more often you genuinely experience that scene, the more familiar it becomes. And what's familiar starts to feel real. And what feels real, actually becomes real. This is a gradual process. But it's a certain process. Neville gives another very useful tip. He says whenever you feel the conscious mind's resistance during imagination, this is a lie, this won't happen, ask a simple question. If this had already happened, how would I feel? This question temporarily bypasses the conscious mind. Because it's just a hypothetical question. Starting with if. And while answering this hypothetical question, you genuinely enter that feeling. And once the feeling enters, consciousness takes it as real. This is a very clever and effective technique. Now a very important section. Neville shares real stories in this book. Actual experiences of people. He tells the story of a woman. This woman was in a very difficult situation. Her husband had left her. And she was struggling severely financially. She heard Neville's teaching. And she chose a specific scene. She imagined her husband coming back home. Both of them sitting at the dinner table together. Normal. Happy. She experienced this scene genuinely, every night, in sats. Within a few weeks. Her husband came back. Neville doesn't tell this story to say it was some miracle. He tells it because it shows. Imagination works. And it specifically works when there's a specific scene. Genuine feeling. Consistent practice. Now another story. A man was struggling severely financially. Bills weren't being paid. There was no job. He chose a scene. He imagined seeing a large amount in his bank account. And genuinely feeling relief. He practiced this every night. Within a few weeks. From a completely unexpected source, an old debt he had actually forgotten about, an old relative repaid it. The amount was more than he expected. Neville says, how it happened wasn't known beforehand. The path wasn't planned. But imagination created that bridge of incidents. Neville shares these stories because the teachings of imagination aren't abstract. They work in real life. With real people. Now a concept that's very important. Neville talks about the role of assumption. We saw this in The Power of Awareness too. But in this book, Neville specifically explores it in the context of creative imagination. Neville says assumption and imagination are a closely linked pair. When you genuinely imagine a desired state, and genuinely stay in it, you automatically assume that state. Meaning, you take it as real. And this assumption, this taking as real, is the key. Neville says a very simple but profound statement. Act as if it is so, and it will be so. This act as if principle is very important. But Neville gives a clarification here. Act as if doesn't mean you should pretend in the outer world. Act as if means in the inner world. In imagination. In consciousness. Outwardly. You don't need to give any fake performance. Inwardly, you genuinely live in that state. And the inner state has a natural, organic effect on outer behavior. Like, if you're genuinely confident in your inner state, your outer body language will automatically be confident. Without any effort. Without any performance. This is the natural expression of the inner state. And this natural expression is what attracts, shapes, creates the outer world. Now a very important concept. Neville talks about the double act. This is an interesting concept. Neville says when we live in the outer world, we perform an act. Who we are. But when we go into imagination, we perform another act. Who we want to become. This is the double act. And in this double act, the inner act, the imagination act, is more powerful. Because the inner act creates what eventually becomes the outer act. Neville gives a beautiful example. He says think about a writer. The writer's outer act is. He sits at the desk and writes. Types words. But before this, there's an inner act. Where he genuinely experiences that story, that scene, that character, in his mind. A writer who genuinely feels that scene, who genuinely lives that character, produces more convincing, more powerful writing. Because his inner act was powerful. Similarly, people who genuinely live their desired state in the inner act, their outer life reflects it. Now a concept that's very prominently present in the creative use of imagination. Neville talks about God and imagination. This is a deep topic. But Neville explains it very specifically and practically. He says when Scripture says God created man in His image, what does this mean? Neville explains. God's image means creative power. Imagination. God is essentially a creator. And God made man with that same creative ability. Your imagination. This is that same creative energy of God. Expressing through you. When you genuinely imagine, you're literally using God's creative power. This isn't a metaphor. Neville says this as a literal truth. And the practical implication is this. Your imagination is not limited. Your imagination is as powerful as God's creative power. The limitations you feel are the limitations of your own doubts and fears. Not of imagination. Imagination itself is unlimited. And when you genuinely accept this truth, your imagination practice transforms completely. Because now you're not imagining like a limited human. You're imagining like a divine creator. And this shift, this fundamental shift, makes a huge difference. Now a concept that comes up very specifically and practically in this book. Neville talks about changing the inner conversation. We heard this in The Power of Awareness too. But in this book, Neville directly connects it to creative imagination. Neville says you're talking to yourself every moment. A continuous inner monologue. And this inner monologue is actually a continuous imagination. When you think, I can't do this, you're imagining that you can't do it. And taking it as truth. When you think, nothing good happens for me, you're imagining that nothing good will happen. This is all imitative imagination. Replaying old patterns, existing fears. Neville says deliberately change this inner conversation. How? The desired state's inner conversation. Like the person you want to become. How would they talk to themselves? They would say, I can do this. This is going to happen. Good things happen to me. Opportunities come to me. Neville says practice this inner conversation. Whenever the old, negative inner conversation starts, notice it. And deliberately, replace it with the desired conversation. This won't be easy at first. Because the old habit is very deeply ingrained. But with awareness, with practice, this changes. And when the inner conversation changes, imagination changes. And when imagination changes, reality changes. Now a very important and interesting concept. Neville shares a very specific observation in this book. He says people who consistently seem lucky, who seem successful, for whom things naturally work out. This isn't actually luck. This is their consistent inner imagination. Those people, mostly automatically, without consciously realizing it, imagine positive, desired states. Their inner conversation is naturally positive. Their default mood is positive. Their assumptions are naturally optimistic. And that's why their outer life is that way. And people who consistently seem unlucky, for whom things always go a certain way. This is also not luck. This is also their consistent inner imagination. But in the negative direction. Neville says this is why. If you want to change your luck, change the direction of your imagination. Consistently. Deliberately. Persistently. And watch how life changes. Now a very important and often missed concept. Neville talks about the receptive attitude. Neville says creative imagination requires a specific inner attitude. That attitude is receptivity. Meaning, being open to receive. Now what does this mean in practical terms? Neville explains. When you're in imitative imagination, your attitude is, I need this. But I don't have it. And I'm struggling. This attitude is closed. Resistant. But with creative imagination, the attitude should be, this is already here. I just need to receive it. This attitude is open. Receptive. And when you're genuinely in this receptive attitude, whatever you imagine goes more easily and deeply into the subconscious. Because you're not resisting. Neville gives a beautiful analogy. He says think about an antenna. When an antenna is properly aligned, the signal is received clearly. No interference. Your inner attitude is that antenna's alignment. When the attitude is receptive, properly aligned, the imagination's signal reaches the subconscious clearly. When the attitude is resistant, fearful, or doubtful, there's interference. The signal gets distorted. And the result gets distorted too. Develop a receptive attitude. And how? Through gratitude. Through trust. And through a genuine, already received, feeling. Now a concept specifically discussed in the creative use of imagination. Neville talks about imagination and the body. This is a very interesting and important topic. Neville says your imagination directly affects your body. We saw this in the lemon experiment. But this isn't limited to just lemons. Neville talks about the relationship between health and imagination. He says when you consistently imagine health, with genuine feeling, your body moves toward reflecting that health. And when you consistently imagine illness, repeatedly replay your sickness, the body reinforces it further. This isn't some magical claim. Medical science acknowledges this too. The placebo effect. Psychosomatic illnesses. The mind-body connection. All of these prove this same principle from different angles. Neville says this is why. If you want good health, genuinely, deliberately, start feeling healthy. Imagine like a healthy person. Move like a healthy person in your imagination. Feel the energy of a healthy person. And consistently. This signals to the body. This state is normal. Move toward it. And the body, which is remarkably responsive to consciousness, starts moving in that direction. Now a very important and honest teaching. Neville says something very direct in this book. He says a lot of people, when they hear creative imagination, get very excited. Yes. This is going to work. I'm starting today. But within a few days or weeks. When results don't appear right away. They quit. This doesn't work. Neville says this is the biggest mistake. And he honestly explains why this happens. First reason. Inconsistency. 1 or 2 days of imagination is not enough. This is a daily practice. A lifestyle. Like going to the gym. Going once doesn't change your body. Consistent, daily practice does. Second reason. Lack of feeling. A lot of people imagine mechanically. Build a picture. But there's no genuine feeling. Without feeling, imagination is powerless. Third reason. Contradiction. They imagine once a day. And imagine the opposite the rest of the day. I am successful. This they imagine at night. This isn't going to work. Things don't go this way for me. This they think all day. This contradiction. This gives the subconscious mixed signals. And results become confusing. Neville says, what's the solution? Consistency. Every day. Genuine feeling. Every time. And as much as possible. Throughout the day, stay in that positive direction. Inner conversation positive. Moods deliberately uplifted. Interrupt negative replay. This is challenging. Feels very hard at the start. But it's possible. And this is the real practice of the creative use of imagination. Now a concept beautifully present in this book. Neville talks about imagination as God in action. Neville says most of the miracles described in the Bible and other spiritual texts are actually demonstrations of the power of imagination. Moses crossed the Red Sea. Jesus turned water into wine. Lazarus was raised from the dead. Neville doesn't view all of these as literal historical events. He sees them as symbolic teachings. Crossing the Red Sea represents navigating a seemingly impossible situation through genuine imagination and faith. Water turning into wine represents transforming an ordinary, unfulfilled desire into an extraordinary reality through consciousness. Lazarus coming back to life represents reviving a dead, seemingly hopeless desire through genuine imagination. Neville says this exact same ability, this exact same power, is within you. And the creative use of imagination teaches you how to consciously use that power. Now a very practical concept. Neville talks in this book about testing the teaching. Neville is very honest. He says, don't trust me. Test it. He suggests. Choose a small, specific desire. Something that's genuinely desirable to you. But not so big that your conscious mind has a lot of resistance to it. Choose a specific scene for that desire. And every night, in sats, genuinely feel that scene. Consistently. For a few weeks. And watch what happens. Neville says if it works, which he says it certainly will, you'll have your first experience. And that experience, that proof, will be more convincing than any book. Because it'll be your own experience. And once you have your own experience, once you firsthand see that imagination works, your practice transforms completely. Because then you're practicing from knowing, not from hope. And practice from knowing is far more powerful than practice from hope. Now a very important and often questioned topic. Neville talks in this book about what about other people's free will. This is a genuine question. If imagination creates reality, does this mean you can control others? Against their will? Neville very clearly says no. And he explains. When you imagine about someone, you're not controlling them. You're changing what you experience of them. This difference is very important. Your experience of any person is always filtered through your own consciousness. When your consciousness about someone changes, your experience of them changes. And often, remarkably, their actual behavior changes too. Not because you controlled them, but because you changed the energy between you and them. Remember the mirror principle. The outer world reflects your inner state. Your relationship with any person is part of your outer world. And it reflects your inner assumptions about them. When those inner assumptions change, the relationship reflects that change. This isn't control. This is inner change. And Neville says this is perfectly ethical. Because you're not forcing anyone. You're developing your own consciousness. Now a very important concept that appears in this book. Neville talks about imagination and dreams. Neville says nighttime dreams and daytime imagination are related. When you imagine something at night, and fall asleep with that imagination, dreams related to it often come. And Neville says this is a good sign. It shows that the imagination has reached the subconscious. The subconscious is processing that imagination. Going deeper with it. And sometimes, in dreams, answers come. Guidance comes. New ideas come. Neville suggests. When you wake up in the morning, note your dreams. Because they show your imagination's subconscious processing. And sometimes, specific guidance comes. That helps you take action in the outer world. Now a concept that's very specific to this book. Neville talks about the law and the promise. This is an important distinction in the book. The law. This is the practical, immediate aspect. Imagining creates reality. It's like a law. It consistently operates. For every person. The promise. This is a deeper, more mystical aspect. A spiritual awakening that eventually happens to every person. When they realize that they themselves are that divine creative consciousness. Neville says start with the law. For practical results. And when you consistently use the law, when you genuinely experience the power of imagination, a deeper understanding naturally develops. Toward the promise. But for getting started, the law is enough. Imagining creates reality. Use it. Experience it. And watch your life change. Now a concept that's very practically useful. Neville talks in this book about morning practice. Neville says right when you wake up. When you're not yet fully awake. That drowsy, half-awake state. This is also a SATS-like state. The conscious mind isn't fully active yet. And in this state, the first thought, the first feeling. This is very important. If you automatically go into anxiety the moment you wake up, what do I have to do today? This is a problem. There's that task, that sets the tone for the whole day. But if you deliberately, in that drowsy state, briefly touch the feeling of that desired scene, that sets the tone for the entire day. This is a very simple practice. When your eyes open in the morning. Before fully waking up. Just for a few seconds. Briefly touch that desired feeling. Today is going to be a good day. Things work out for me. Good things happen to me. Feel it. Don't just think it. And then get up. This simple practice, done daily, can significantly improve the entire quality of your life. Because you're starting every day from a positive, receptive inner state. And that inner state shapes the day's events. Now a very important concept. Neville talks about the discipline of imagination. Neville says imagination is a power. But power needs discipline. Undisciplined imagination is a double-edged sword. When your imagination is uncontrolled, it goes in every direction. Toward fear too. Toward doubt too. Toward negative scenarios too. And this uncontrolled, fear-based imagination is exactly what creates problems. Discipline means deliberately, consciously, holding your imagination in the desired direction. This doesn't happen automatically. It takes effort. But this effort is worth investing. Because the return on this effort is huge. Neville says the way to develop discipline of imagination is: first, awareness. Whenever negative imagination starts, notice it. Second, interruption. As soon as you notice it, interrupt it. Third, redirection. Deliberately, bring it to the desired direction. This process needs to be done again and again. At the start. Very often. But with practice. It becomes more natural. And eventually, positive imagination becomes your default. And that default state changes everything. Now a very important and powerful concept. Neville talks in this book about the night watch. Neville says, at night, before sleep. This time is very precious. We've discussed SATs. But Neville adds a specific point here. He says the last thought, the last feeling, before sleep, gets processed by the subconscious all night. And whatever gets processed all night reflects in the next day's reality. This is why. The night watch. Before sleep. What's in your mind? If today was a bad day, and you fall asleep carrying that same negativity, the subconscious processes that negativity all night. And the next day, that negativity gets even deeper. But if you deliberately, before sleep, go to the desired scene, touch the desired feeling, then the subconscious processes it all night, deepens it. And the next day, you wake up with a slightly different consciousness. A little bit. But consistently. And this daily, consistent, slight shift is cumulative. Day after day. In weeks. In months. You see how much shift has come in the inner state. And how much shift has come in the outer life. This is the night watch. And this is one of Neville's most important daily practices. Now a very interesting and rarely discussed concept. Neville talks in this book about imagining for others. Neville says you can genuinely imagine not just for yourself, but for others too. And this can actually help them. An example. Say your friend is struggling a lot. No job. Depressed. You imagine a specific scene for them. In which they're happy. Settled. Doing well in life. And you genuinely feel that scene. Their happiness. Neville says this is more powerful than some distant prayer. Because it's specific. Detailed. Genuinely felt. And consciousness, which is an interconnected whole, not just a collection of isolated individuals, receives this genuine inner state. And how it affects them, exactly isn't known. But it affects them. Neville says one important principle, though. When imagining for others, don't imagine their current problem. I wish they would get a job. Poor thing is struggling so much. Not this. This is imagining their problem itself. Instead, imagine the desired outcome. They're settled. Happy. Thriving. Feel this. This is genuine help for them. Now a concept that makes this book uniquely powerful. Neville talks about imagination as the only power. Neville makes a very bold statement here. He says in this universe, there's one underlying power. That power is consciousness. And the expression of consciousness is imagination. Whatever exists was first in consciousness. In imagination. And when consciousness imagined it, genuinely, completely, it became physical reality. This is a universal law. This applies to human beings. This applies to nature. This applies to every level of existence. Neville says when you deeply understand this, the way you treat your imagination completely changes. Because now it's not a nice-to-have technique for you. It's literally the power through which realities are made. Your imagination. Your creative use of imagination. This is that power. And this power. You have it. Every moment. The question is, are you using it? Consciously? Deliberately? Creatively? Or are you leaving it unused? Or worse, using it in a negative direction? This is the teaching of the creative use of imagination. Use your power. Use it consciously. Use it in the direction of what you genuinely desire. And watch your life transform. Now a few more very important concepts that appear in this book. Neville talks about the disciplined eye. Neville introduces a very interesting concept. He says most people's eye is dual. Meaning, they're seeing two things at once. Their desired reality. And their current, unwanted reality. I need a job. And also. But there's no job right now. I want to be healthy. And also. But there's this problem right now. This dual vision. This contradiction. Confuses the subconscious. Neville says you need a single, disciplined eye. A single eye. That only looks at the desired reality. This isn't denial. You don't need to ignore current reality. But your attention, your focus, your imagination. That should be primarily, dominantly, on the desired reality. Scripture says, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." Neville interprets this practically. When your imagination is single, focused, on the desired state, your whole being moves in that direction. Light. Meaning. Clarity. Direction. Energy. Creation. This happens when the eye is single. Practice it. Single eye. Focused imagination. Now a very important concept. Neville talks about the role of faith. Neville says faith has a specific meaning in this teaching. Faith doesn't mean blind belief. Faith means genuine trust based on understanding. When you genuinely understand that imagination creates reality. And when you personally experience this. The trust that develops, that's faith. And this faith. This genuine trust. Makes imagination more powerful. Because when you genuinely trust the process, you're not contaminating your imagination with doubt. And doubt-free imagination is the most powerful imagination. Neville says start with small experiments. Build your faith through personal experience. And as faith grows, so does the power of your imagination. This is a circular, reinforcing process. Faith powers imagination. Imagination creates results. Results strengthen faith. And so on. Now a concept that's very specific to the creative use of imagination. Neville talks about imagining and acting. This is a very important and commonly misunderstood topic. Neville says, imagining creates reality, doesn't mean you should just sit and imagine and not physically do anything at all. Action is necessary. But the order and quality of action changes. Normal approach. You react to the outer world. Take actions according to whatever the circumstances are. Imagination-based approach. You shift the inner state. And from that shifted inner state, natural, inspired actions arise. Neville gives an example. A businessman wants his business to grow. Normal approach. He'll see what competitors are doing. He'll follow market trends. He'll take reactive decisions. Imagination-based approach. He'll genuinely be in that grown business, in imagination. And from that state, inspired ideas will arise. Unique decisions will emerge. And the quality and effectiveness of those inspired actions will be completely different. Neville says the actions you take from an inspired inner state are far more effective than the actions you take from a reactive, fear-based state. This is why. Imagine first. And then act from that aligned inner state. Now a very important and practical concept. Neville talks in this book about the art of feeling real. This is the concept that separates effective imagination from ineffective imagination. Neville says when you imagine a desired scene, the most important question is, does this feel real? Not. Is the picture clear? Not. Is it detailed? Does it feel real? And feeling real means, is your body responding the way it did in the lemon experiment? Are your emotions genuinely stirring? If yes, The imagination is effective. If not, it needs more depth. So how do you make it feel real? Neville says. First, add more sensory details. What's visible? What's audible? What's touchable? Second, move slower. Don't rush through the scene. Live in it. Third, be in the scene. First person. Not watching. Fourth, do it in a relaxed state. Imagination doesn't work in tension. Fifth, let emotions arise naturally. Don't force them, but welcome them. When in the middle of the scene your eyes suddenly get a little misty. When you suddenly genuinely feel happy. When your heart rate changes slightly. These are signs. The imagination is feeling real. And when this happens, the subconscious fully received it. This is an art. The art of feeling real. And this is the core of the creative use of imagination. Now a very important concept. Neville talks about the real cause of events. Neville makes a very bold statement. He says the events that happen in your life, their real cause isn't outside. The real cause is inside. In your imagination. This is a very challenging idea. But someone else did something bad. Someone hurt me. External events ruined my life. Neville doesn't dismiss these. He acknowledges that outer events happened. But he says, what was the inner state when those events happened? And before. Because it's the inner state that consistently attracts those events, draws those situations. This isn't for blame. This is for empowerment. If the inner state is the real cause, then by changing the inner state, future events can change. Neville says accepting this principle means letting go of victim mentality. And embracing creator mentality. And this shift, this change in perspective, is the ultimate lesson of the creative use of imagination. You are a creator, not a victim. And when you genuinely accept this, and consciously start creating, life changes. Now a very important final concept. Neville talks about imagination and love. Neville says when you use imagination in its highest form, that is love. Love. When genuinely felt. For someone. For yourself. For life. This is the highest form of imagination. Because in love, there's that already having feeling. There's that already belonging feeling. There's that already complete feeling. And these feelings, all these feelings, create positive realities most powerfully and beautifully. Neville says when you genuinely imagine from love, not from desire, not from need, not from fear, but from pure love, then imagination is in its highest, most creative, most powerful form. This is why. Cultivate love. Love for life. Love for others. Love for yourself. Love for possibilities. And from this love, imagine. This is the essence of the creative use of imagination. So here's the summary of this entire script. Imagination has two uses, imitative which replays the past and creative which builds new reality. Imagining creates reality. Imagination and feeling together create creative power. Feeling is the water to the seed that helps it grow. Moods are creative states, choose the mood first, circumstances follow. Thinking from the end means already living in the desired state. The bridge of incidents automatically builds itself when you genuinely assume the desired end state. The pruning shears of revision let you revise past events. SATS, the state right before sleep, is the most powerful. Choose a specific scene, not a vague one. Multisensory imagination is more effective. Gratitude is a creative state. Morning practice sets the tone for the entire day. Discipline of imagination is necessary. The night watch, sleeping with the desired feeling at night, lets the subconscious work in the positive direction all night. You can imagine for others too. The single-eye, focused imagination, is more effective. Faith, trust born from understanding, makes imagination more powerful. Imagination and action go together, action arising from inspired inner state. The art of feeling real makes imagination truly effective. Inner state is the real cause of outer events. An imagination done from a state of love is the highest form of creative imagination. And ultimately, the creative use of imagination teaches this. You are a creator. Your imagination is divine. And when you use it consciously, deliberately, lovingly, you literally create your own life.